Oh, please, it's just a game. Eleanor Whitmore scoffed, sipping her wine. Let's see if the maid's son even knows how the pieces move. Those words, light-hearted and mocking, would soon echo across social media, boardrooms, and newsrooms, not for the joke she thought she was making, but for what she didn't see coming. He was only 11, black, poor, and invisible to the powerful, until the checkmate. The sun bled gold over Eleanor Whitmore's estate in Connecticut, an architectural beast of old money and ruthless ambition. She was the kind of woman who wore silence like a diamond necklace, cold, polished, and terrifyingly expensive. Eleanor wasn't just rich. She was born rich. CEO of a private equity firm, she hosted elite weekend soirees with imported wine, classical quartets, and hand-picked guests meant to admire her art and her intellect. But that Saturday afternoon, as her guests gathered in the atrium, where an antique ivory-inlaid chessboard rested on a carved mahogany table, Eleanor felt bored. She'd already checkmated 3 of her guests, all men, all Ivy League, all smug before they sat and embarrassed when they stood. Then she heard it. A laugh, bright and unfiltered, echoed from the kitchen. Clara, the live-in maid, had worked for Eleanor for 6 years, reliable, silent, and good with silverware. But today, her 11-year-old son, Micah, was tagging along. Clara usually kept him out of sight, but schools were closed and the sitter canceled. She begged Eleanor for one day's mercy. "Keep him out of the drawing rooms," Eleanor had said flatly, "and don't let him touch anything." Micah wasn't touching anything. He was quietly sketching patterns on napkins and reading a book far too advanced for his age, while classical music played in the background. Still, his laugh, just one, was enough to reach Eleanor's ears. "Whose child is making that noise?" she snapped. A guest smirked. "That's your maid's kid, I think." Eleanor's brow twitched. She hated being reminded that people existed beneath her, unless they were polishing her floors. Later that afternoon, champagne flowed. Eleanor was back at her chessboard, bored again. A guest, half drunk and smirking, gestured toward the boy across the hall. "You know what would be hilarious?" he chuckled. Eleanor raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "Let the boy play," he said. "See if the help breeds talent." Laughter. Even Clara, standing frozen at the kitchen door, didn't know whether to be insulted or afraid. Eleanor turned her gaze to Micah. He was quiet, focused, sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at a painting of Napoleon. "Bring him here," she ordered. Clara hesitated. "Ma'am, he's never played against someone like you." "Oh, I'm sure," Eleanor said with a tight smile. "But it'll be amusing." Micah approached cautiously, wearing scuffed shoes and a hand-me-down sweater with a small tear on the sleeve. Eleanor looked him over like a bored lioness studying a mouse. "You know how to play?" she asked, patronizing. Micah nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Color?" "Black, please." A murmur rippled through the guests. This child, choosing black? Eleanor allowed it, her eyes sharp and mocking. The first move was hers. Pawn to e4. Micah met her gaze. Then with tiny fingers, he moved his own pawn to e5. Simple, classical, safe, but something flickered in Eleanor's mind. That wasn't random. Piece by piece, move by move, the game unfolded. The guests expected an easy win. Eleanor herself expected to toy with the boy, drag it out for dramatic flair, and then end it with a flourish. But 5 minutes in, something was off. Micah's moves were intelligent, unemotional, calculated. Eleanor leaned forward, her wine forgotten. He wasn't reacting. He was leading. 10 moves in, Eleanor found herself retreating. The room had gone silent. Her guests were now watching closely. Micah wasn't smiling, wasn't nervous. He moved with quiet confidence, eyes darting only to the board. She tried to bait him with a queenside trap. He ignored it. He was playing the center. He knew what she was doing. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked, voice cold. "My mom taught me when I was 5, Micah said simply. "Then I taught myself with books." "What kind of books?" "Bobby Fischer, Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen." That name, Carlsen, sent a chill down her spine. She'd read the biography, a chess prodigy who crushed grandmasters at age 13. Micah had just defended a rook with a bishop maneuver she hadn't seen since her college tournament days. He wasn't lucky, he was trained. No, he was gifted. Move 27. Micah's knight danced across the board. He was 3 steps ahead. Eleanor was sweating. The boy looked up, calmly, like he already knew what she didn't. And then he whispered, "You're in trouble, ma'am." The room had changed. No more idle chatter, no more laughter. Only the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock and the sharp clicks of Micah's fingers on the chessboard. Each move echoed louder than the last. Eleanor's guests leaned in, eyes wide, wine glasses untouched. One whispered to another, "He's toying with her. Look at his control over the center." Another added, "That's the Sicilian defense, but he's improvising." Clara stood at the edge of the room, gripping a tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She had spent years hiding Micah's brilliance, not out of shame, but protection. She'd seen too many gifted boys like him ignored, crushed, or worse, used. But now he was on a stage, and he was winning. Eleanor's perfectly curated calm began to fray. She moved her queen too early. Micah responded instantly, a bishop cutting off the retreat path. "Bold," Eleanor murmured, trying to sound composed, but her hand trembled ever so slightly as she reached for her next piece. Micah didn't smirk, didn't brag. He simply leaned forward and whispered, almost apologetically, "You shouldn't have moved that bishop on move 12. A few of the guests gasped. He wasn't being rude. He was being honest. He had seen her mistake the moment she made it and waited to punish it. Now he did. He trapped her knight, sacrificed a pawn, and created a double attack Eleanor couldn't escape. Her confidence cracked like thin glass under pressure. A female guest leaned toward her husband and whispered, "He's actually better than my nephew, and he's been taking lessons for 3 years. The husband replied, "He's better than Eleanor." Eleanor heard that. For the first time in her estate's grand atrium, she was the underdog, a child, a maid's son, black, beating her in front of a room full of CEOs and socialites. No, it couldn't be. She couldn't let this happen. But denial has no power over checkmate. Micah didn't notice the tension. He was deep inside the patterns, moving with surgical precision. Each piece wasn't just a tool, it was part of a story only he could see. He was several moves ahead, anticipating, calculating. He could see the inevitable. So could Clara. She wanted to stop him, wanted to pull him away, apologize for the disruption, and disappear before her son embarrassed a powerful woman and risked their place in this world. But Micah wasn't here to embarrass anyone. He was here because someone challenged him, and he loved the game. And for once, Clara stayed silent. She let her son shine. Eleanor exhaled sharply. Her queen was cornered, her king exposed. She tried to offer a draw. "Very impressive," she said tightly. "We can call it even." Micah blinked. "You're losing." A few people coughed to hide their laughter. Eleanor's voice sharpened. "It's just a friendly match." Micah nodded. "Yes, ma'am, but I'd like to finish." Check. She swallowed her pride and moved to defend, only to realize she couldn't, not without giving up her rook. She chose to lose the rook. Micah punished the hesitation by splitting her pawns. Eleanor's board was collapsing. 6 more moves, each one quieter than the last. No one spoke now. Eleanor's king was cornered. Her face, once regal and composed, now trembled. Then it happened. Micah's soft voice broke the silence. Checkmate. Gasps. A guest actually clapped before catching himself. Someone else whispered, "Did you see that endgame? The control?" Eleanor stared at the board. She didn't blink, didn't move. Micah, still calm, stood up. He gently extended his hand. "Thank you for the game, ma'am." Eleanor looked at the hand like it was poison. For a second, pride strangled her. Then she slowly, very slowly, shook it. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Micah smiled. "I'm Micah, Clara's son." Clara rushed forward, eyes wide. "Micah, let's go." But a man in a tailored suit approached. "Wait," he said. "What's your last name?" "Thomas," Micah replied. "Micah Thomas." The man turned to Eleanor. "This boy, he could be a national player. Have you ever seen anything like it?" Eleanor didn't answer. Micah turned to Clara. "Can we go home now?" Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. And as they walked out of the mansion, Micah paused near the front door and looked back at the marble statue of Athena in the hall. He had just defeated a modern-day goddess in her own temple. That night, Eleanor sat alone at the chessboard, replaying the game in silence, move by move, trying to understand where it all went wrong. But deep down, she knew. Micah didn't just beat her, he dismantled her. And somewhere in that quiet house of ego and gold, she whispered to herself, "Who is that boy?" Micah and Clara sat in the back of a slow-moving cab. The mansion's glowing lights faded behind them, replaced by dim street lamps and the distant hum of city life. Clara held her son's hand tightly, but she wasn't smiling. "Micah," she finally whispered, "you weren't supposed to." "I know," he replied, watching raindrops race down the window. "But I had to." Clara's voice shook. "People like her. They don't forget when someone humiliates them, especially not someone like us." Micah didn't look away from the window. "I didn't humiliate her," he said softly. "I just played the truth." 6 years earlier, a dusty apartment in Harlem. Micah was 5. Too young, they said. Too distracted. Too quiet. Too strange. But he had an old chess set, missing 2 pawns and a knight. He'd found it in a junk shop. Sat on the floor every day, alone, replaying games from a tattered Bobby Fischer book he didn't fully understand. Until one day, Clara's elderly neighbor, Mr. Dawkins, knocked on their door. "Young man," he croaked, "you keep setting up that same opening. You know what that is?" Micah looked up. "The Ruy Lopez." Dawkins blinked. From that day forward, Micah played the old man every evening. He never lost once. Dawkins, once a local coach and former state finalist, tried to push Micah toward tournaments. But Clara resisted. She'd seen the world chew up gifted children, especially those with no money, no name, no shield. Micah wasn't just smart, he was different. He remembered every move, every loss he saw on YouTube, every tactic he read about once. At age 7, he solved grandmaster puzzles in his head. At 8, he could replay Kasparov's 1999 immortal game, move by move, backward. But Clara wouldn't let him compete. "Being brilliant," she told him, "won't protect you, but it will make people hate you faster." Back at the estate, Eleanor sat alone in her velvet chair, fingers hovering over her tablet. She had watched the security footage of the match. Twice, then a third time. She zoomed in on the boy's face, his posture, his eerie calm. "I need everything on him," she said aloud, dialing her assistant. "Name, school, where he learned chess, everything." "But ma'am." "Do it." And as she stared at the board, she realized something chilling. He wasn't playing against her. He was simply playing. The next day, Clara met with Micah's school principal. They called her in after a teacher reported Micah refused to participate in math class. He's distracted, the principal said. Doodles chessboards on everything. Doesn't raise his hand. Stares out windows. Clara nodded. What grade did he get on the last test? The principal flipped the paper. 110. Clara crossed her arms. Then maybe you're not keeping up. Micah was misunderstood, boxed in by systems made for average. The school didn't challenge him, so he challenged himself. By the end of the week, Eleanor's assistant returned with a folder. No competition history, he said. No training, no record. Eleanor opened the file, stared at the grainy picture of Micah standing next to Clara outside a laundromat. The page below read, Micah Thomas, age 11, mother, Clara Thomas, housemaid, father, unknown, IQ, unrecorded, no documented education in chess. He's a ghost, the assistant whispered. Eleanor sat back, mind racing. A prodigy, hidden in plain sight, untrained, untested, unleashed. That evening, Clara received an envelope slid under her apartment door. Gold trim, embossed seal. Inside was a single handwritten card. Micah Thomas is cordially invited to participate in the Hudson Valley Youth Invitational Chess Tournament, sponsored by the Eleanor Astor Foundation. Clara's hands shook. She flipped the card over. No entry fee, transportation provided, no media, no cameras, just the game. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. Let's see if lightning strikes twice. EA. Clara stared at the letter for a long time. Then, without saying a word, she tore it in half. Later that night, Clara tucked the pieces of the torn invitation into the trash. She turned off the lights, but Micah was already sitting by the window. Why did you rip it? He asked. Clara froze. You need to stay invisible. Micah's voice was calm, too calm. I don't want to be invisible anymore. Clara turned. They'll eat you alive. He shook his head. Not if I make them afraid first. The next morning, Micah mailed his own envelope. Not to Eleanor, but to the National Chess Federation. Inside it, a single flash drive. One note. 12 games I played in my head. Against your best. Try me. A boardroom of elite minds sat in silence. A flash drive blinked blue in the center of a laptop. On screen, 12 chess games, 12 opponents, all simulated. But the plays weren't just good. They were impossible. Grandmaster-level attacks mixed with childlike creativity. Traps they didn't teach. Counters they hadn't seen in decades. One by one, they analyzed. One by one, they lost. Who is this kid? A director muttered. Another whispered, he used a Carlson variation and combined it with Tal's bluffing tactics. Is this AI generated? Someone asked. No, the head of Federation muttered. It's real. Then he leaned back and said the words no one expected. Find him. Same day, Eleanor's estate. Eleanor stood by her piano, watching snow gather at the edges of her fountain. Her phone rang. Eleanor Astor speaking. Ma'am, this is Thomas Gable from the National Chess Federation. You may not know us. I'm aware, Eleanor replied flatly. You host those televised children's tournaments, correct? A pause, then, we received a submission from a boy named Micah Thomas, 11 years old, no formal record, claims to be self-taught. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Why are you calling me? Because you were the last person to play him and lose. There was silence on the line. Then Eleanor said, he didn't win. I simply allowed the game to end. Thomas Gable didn't flinch. We want to invite him to our closed championship in Chicago, not the Kids League, the Open Invitational. That's for ranked players only, Eleanor snapped. We're making an exception. She stared at her reflection in the window. No cameras, no public attention. Not yet, she said. Agreed. She paused, then added coldly, if he plays, I'll be there. back in Harlem. Clara burst into the small living room, furious. "Micah, what did you send?" He didn't answer. He was busy setting up a fresh game on the old board, white pieces already in place. She held up her phone. "The Chess Federation? Micah, do you want the spotlight to burn you?" Micah finally looked up. Calm, steady. "I want to know how far this can go." Clara's hands trembled. "This isn't a game anymore." "Yes, it is," he said. "It's just not on the board anymore." Clara sat down, heart racing. Micah leaned forward and said, "They think they're inviting me, but I'm inviting them." 1 week later, a limo rolled up in front of a plain brick building. Micah stepped out, holding nothing but a backpack and a cheap travel set. Inside, a dim-lit hall filled with dusty tables, analog clocks ticking, and walls lined with faded portraits. The Chicago Invitational Training Center, a sanctuary of forgotten grandmasters. There, Micah would train, not with coaches, but with the ghosts of the game, archived matches, obscure openings, endgames that took 50 moves. He didn't just study, he memorized. Eleanor stood in her private hall, boards arranged on every surface. She moved pieces fast, mechanically. Each move, a strike, a lesson, a punishment. She wasn't trying to win games anymore. She was trying to crush ghosts. In her mind, Micah wasn't a child. He was an enemy. And no child, no matter how brilliant, was going to make her look like a fool again. She called in her old trainer from Ukraine, ordered a private AI to simulate Micah's style. She didn't want to beat him. She wanted to erase him. Chicago Hotel Suite. Micah sat across from Clara. The silence between them was heavy, but no longer angry. "I'm not asking you to agree," he said softly. "Just to watch." Clara nodded slowly. "I'm scared." "I'm not," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "You should be." Micah looked out the window. "You once said, 'People hate brilliance.' They do. Then I'll give them something they'll never forget." The Chicago Grand Hall was packed. Media had been banned, but word leaked. A child was about to play one of the world's most feared private players. Eleanor entered in black. Micah entered in a school hoodie and worn sneakers. She sneered. "Couldn't dress for the occasion?" He looked up. "I didn't come for the occasion." She sat. The clocks clicked, and the first move was made. E4. Micah responded instantly. C5. The Sicilian defense. Eleanor's eyes flashed. So he was here to fight. Mid-game. Move 12. Micah sacrifices a bishop. Gasp from the crowd. Move 19. He advances his pawn deep, threatening both rook and queen. Commentators whispering now, watching from the sealed booth. This is absurd." "No, this is beautiful." Eleanor's hand hesitated. Micah didn't blink. Every move was ice. Until finally, move 37. She reached for her king, paused, and did something no one saw coming. She knocked it over, resigned. The crowd erupted. Micah blinked once. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor stood up, walked out in silence. Outside the hall, a black SUV waited for Eleanor. She entered quietly, eyes wide, not with anger, but with something else. Fear. In her hand, a folded note slipped into her bag by someone unknown. It read, "This was never about the game. It was about what comes after." The footage of the chess match had gone viral. Not just a few shares, millions of views. Clips of Micah's calm focus, his daring queen sacrifice, and the final checkmate had flooded the internet. News anchors were calling him the Black Bobby Fischer, the boy with the billionaire brain, chess's youngest prophet. And when they found out he wasn't a child of privilege, but the son of a maid, that's when the story exploded. Emily sat in her designer chair, a bitter taste in her mouth. The same room where she once laughed at Rosa, now filled with shame and silence. On her desk sat a neatly folded resignation letter, but not hers. It was from Daniel, her husband, the millionaire who invited Micah to the match as a joke. He had left a note. I saw something in that boy I've never seen in myself. Courage. I'm starting a foundation in Micah's name, not to fix what I did, but to support every genius society overlooks. He walked out of the penthouse that day. Emily never saw him again. Micah sat nervously in front of a polished desk. Across from him, a tall, stately man introduced himself with a handshake. My name is Gary. I run the U.S. Chess Federation. He pulled out a letter, official, embossed. We'd like to sponsor you for international tournaments. You'll have a coach, travel the world, compete with grandmasters. Micah's hands trembled as he accepted. The boy who once taught himself using torn pages and borrowed books was now going to represent the country. Rosa sat beside Micah on a talk show couch, lights shining bright. The host leaned forward. Rosa, how did it feel seeing your son go from a quiet boy in your employer's shadow to an international star? Rosa held back tears. All I ever wanted was for Micah to dream. I didn't know the world would finally listen. The audience erupted into applause. The camera pans across rows of young children, learning chess. Above the main hall is a bronze plaque, the Micah Rosa Institute for Geniuses Born in Silence. Micah now taught others, children from broken homes, struggling backgrounds, those told they'd never be more than a number. He wasn't just playing the game anymore. He was rewriting the rules. Micah, now 14, sits at the same table he once practiced at, a new wooden chessboard in front of him, gifted by a grandmaster he defeated in Berlin. He looks at Rosa and smiles. Mom, remember when you said being a maid wasn't something to be ashamed of? Yes, baby. Well, now the world knows. A maid's son is a king on the board. Sometimes the greatest minds come from the quietest corners. Sometimes the people the world laughs at become the very ones who inspire it. And sometimes the joke becomes the legend, because the only move greater than checkmate is proving the world wrong.